The 1980s kitchen had more electrical outlets than a recording studio, and every single one was taken by something that did not work. Your mother asked for it by name. Your father plugged it in on a Saturday morning. By the following weekend, it was behind the crock pot with the cord wrapped around it, never mentioned again. That was the cycle. The 1980s were the golden age of kitchen gadgets that promised to change your life and then sat there collecting dust until the next garage sale. One appliance on this list ran live electricity directly through your food. The machine at 14 promised to preserve your leftovers for months and delivered nothing but clogged seals and leaking bags. And the one at 9 sat on every counter in America until a simpler invention erased it practically overnight. So hit subscribe, because here are 25 kitchen appliances from the 1980s that failed completely. Number 25. The inside-the-shell egg scrambler. The idea was simple. You pushed a needle through the shell, a small motor scrambled the egg while it was still sealed inside, and then you boiled it as usual. The result was a rubbery yellow sphere with the texture of a bouncy ball. The selling point was that you could scramble an egg without dirtying a bowl, which solved a problem that took about 4 seconds to solve with a fork. The needle left a visible hole in the shell, so the egg often cracked during boiling anyway. And after all that effort, the scrambled egg inside tasted exactly like a regular boiled egg that had gone wrong. Most of them ended up in a drawer next to the spare batteries and rubber bands, used once on the morning they were unwrapped and never touched again. Number 24. The electric crepe maker. You dipped a heated dome into a shallow pan of batter, flipped it over, and waited for a paper-thin crepe to form on the surface. The commercials made it look effortless. In real life, the batter dripped off the dome, left half-cooked streaks across the counter, and the crepe either stuck permanently to the cooking surface or tore into pieces when you tried to peel it off. Even the ones that worked produced a crepe so thin you could read a newspaper through it. Most American families had no idea what to do with a crepe once they actually had one. You could put jam on it or powdered sugar, and then you had eaten a crepe. The novelty lasted about a weekend. By Monday, the crepe maker was behind the waffle iron and it stayed there. Number 23. The hot dogger. This one deserves a moment. The hot dogger was a plastic device with 2 metal prongs. You impaled a hot dog on the prongs, plugged the unit into the wall, and 110 volts of household electricity ran directly through the meat. The hot dog cooked from the inside out in about 60 seconds. The prongs left 2 burnt holes at each end. The hot dog sometimes split open and sprayed boiling juice across the counter. And if the hot dog was too short or too long for the prongs, it either did not make contact or hung off the side at an angle. There was no temperature control and no timer. Most families tried it once, looked at each other, and went back to boiling water on the stove. Number 22. The electric yogurt maker. The pitch was that you could make fresh yogurt at home for a fraction of the store price. Making yogurt, though, required heating milk to a specific temperature, adding a bacterial culture, and then keeping the mixture at a steady warmth for 6 to 8 hours. The electric yogurt maker handled only that last step. You still had to do everything else yourself. After a full day of effort, you had 6 small cups of yogurt that tasted slightly different from the yogurt you could buy at the grocery store for less than $1. The machines were slow, finicky, and produced portions so small that a family of 4 would need to run it every single day just to keep up. Most people made yogurt twice and then discovered that store-bought was perfectly fine. Number 21. The microwave bacon rack. Somebody looked at a microwave oven and decided the one thing it was missing was a dedicated plastic rack for cooking bacon. The rack held strips of bacon vertically so the grease would drip down into a tray below. In theory, you got crispy bacon without the mess. In practice, the bacon curled, shrank, and wrapped itself around the plastic posts like a vine on a fence. The grease splattered across the inside of the microwave. The bacon came out rubbery in some spots and burnt in others, with a texture that resembled neither fried nor baked, and cleaning the rack afterward took longer than it would have taken to just lay the bacon flat in a pan. The rack usually melted or warped after a few uses, which ended the experiment permanently. Number 20. The electric pasta maker. The idea of fresh pasta at home was irresistible. The electric pasta maker promised to mix, knead, and extrude perfect noodles at the push of a button. It jammed. The dough clogged the extrusion plate within minutes. The motor overheated if you ran it too long. The noodles came out in uneven strips that stuck together in a clump before they hit the counter. Cleaning the machine required disassembling a dozen small parts, some of which were nearly impossible to reach without a toothpick. The dough dried in the extrusion holes and hardened like cement. Even when everything worked perfectly, the pasta it produced was marginally better than what came out of a box for $1. Italian grandmothers had been making pasta by hand for centuries with nothing but flour, eggs, and a rolling pin, and the electric version could not match what they did in their sleep. Number 19. The Sultan Hot Ray Warming Tray. Every holiday dinner party in the 1980s had one. The Sultan Hot Ray was a flat electric tray that you plugged in and set on the counter, and it kept food warm while guests arrived. The concept was elegant. The execution was a slow disaster. The hot ray had one temperature setting, and that was warm. Not keep it serving temperature warm, but slowly continue cooking everything on top of it until the bottom layer is scorched warm. Casseroles dried out along the edges. Rolls turned into bricks. Dips formed a thick skin on the surface that you had to peel off before serving. The cheese in anything with cheese separated into oil and rubber. And because the tray was always on, there was no way to stop the process once it started. The bigger issue was timing. Put the food on too early and dinner was overcooked before the first guest walked through the door. Put it on too late and you might as well have just left everything on the stove. The coordination required a level of precision that most holiday kitchens, already running at full chaos, simply did not have. The hot ray was also remarkably good at burning the bottom of the tablecloth, scorching the surface of the dining room table, or melting whatever plastic serving dish someone absent-mindedly placed on top of it. The cord ran across the counter like a tripwire, and at least one holiday gathering in every family ended with somebody catching it and sending the entire buffet layout sliding toward the edge. By the early 1990s, the hot ray had been replaced by the concept of just putting things in the oven on low and hoping for the best, which worked roughly as well and required no additional equipment. The trays sat in basement storage for years, occasionally surfacing at estate sales where they sold for almost nothing. Number 18. The electric hamburger cooker. This was a clamshell device that pressed two heated plates together with a raw hamburger patty in between. You were supposed to get a perfectly cooked burger in under 5 minutes, no grill required. Instead, the patty compressed into a thin gray disc with grill marks that were stamped into the cooking surface, not earned by actual heat. The juice ran out through the seams and pooled on the counter. The patty stuck to the top plate and tore in half when you opened the lid. The whole kitchen smelled like burnt grease for the rest of the evening, and the non-stick coating peeled off within a few months of regular use, leaving bare metal that stuck to everything. The burgers it produced were uniformly flat, uniformly dry, and uniformly disappointing. Years later, a similar concept would make a comeback on late-night television, but in the 1980s, the technology was not ready, and neither were the burgers. Number 17. The Countertop Trash Compactor. This one was not a gadget. It was a full-size appliance that belonged under the counter, and it cost several $100s. The idea was that you could compress an entire week of kitchen garbage into a single dense brick, reducing the number of trips to the curb. The motor was powerful enough to crush cans, boxes, and food scraps into a block the size of a loaf of bread. Nobody anticipated the smell. Compacted garbage is still garbage, and pressing it all together concentrated the odor into something that could clear a room. The compactor also required special heavy-duty bags that cost more than regular trash bags. The motor was loud enough to stop a conversation, and the compressed bricks were so heavy that carrying them to the curb defeated the entire purpose of reducing trips. Most families ran the compactor for a few months, noticed their kitchen smelled permanently like the inside of a dumpster, and went back to regular trash bags. Number 16. The electric potato peeler. A small motorized drum lined with a rough abrasive surface. You dropped 2 or 3 potatoes in, added water, turned it on, and the drum spun the potatoes against the surface until the skin came off. It also ground away a significant portion of the potato itself. The peeler could not distinguish between skin and flesh, so every potato came out noticeably smaller than when it went in. Small potatoes turned into marbles. Irregular shapes got caught in the drum and bounced around until they were perfectly round. The water turned into a gray, starchy slurry that splashed out of the top if you filled the drum even slightly too full. And the abrasive surface dulled after a few uses, which meant the potatoes just spun around in dirty water without anything happening at all. A regular vegetable peeler cost a couple of dollars and did a better job in less time. Number 15. The electric food dehydrator. The commercials made it look like a revolution. You sliced fruit, laid the pieces on stacked trays, plugged in the machine, and 12 hours later, you had dried fruit and homemade jerky. In truth, a food dehydrator was essentially a fan blowing warm air over food for the better part of a day. The machine ran overnight, and what you got in the morning was a handful of leathery apple slices that tasted vaguely of whatever the plastic tray was made of. Homemade jerky required marinating, slicing the meat paper thin, and running the machine for up to a full day. And the result bore almost no resemblance to the jerky you could buy at a gas station. The trays were impossible to clean, the machine took up an enormous amount of counter space, and after the initial novelty wore off, most people realized that dried fruit was already available at the grocery store for less effort and roughly the same cost. Number 14. The Seal-A-Meal Vacuum Sealer. The promise was simple. You placed leftover food in a special plastic bag, inserted the open end into the machine, and it sucked out all the air and heat-sealed the bag shut. Your food would last weeks, maybe months, preserved in a vacuum like something out of a space program. The first trouble was the bags. The Seal-A-Meal required proprietary bags that came in rolls, and they were not cheap. A box of bags cost almost as much as the food you were trying to save. You had to cut the bag to size, seal one end, fill it, and then seal the other end, which was a 4-step process for something that a regular Ziploc bag could handle in about 3 seconds. The second trouble was liquids. Anything with sauce, gravy, or moisture got sucked into the vacuum mechanism along with the air. The machine clogged, the seal failed, the bag leaked. Soups were completely off limits. Casseroles were risky. Even leftover spaghetti had enough residual moisture to cause problems. The third trouble was the seal itself. The heating element had to be at exactly the right temperature for exactly the right amount of time, and the early models had no way to control either one. Seal too short, and the bag popped open in the freezer. Seal too long, and the plastic melted into a wrinkled mess that fused to the heating element and had to be scraped off with a knife. After all that effort, most people discovered that the food they sealed in January and found in the back of the freezer in October had developed freezer burn anyway, because the seal had given out somewhere along the way. The machine went into the closet, and the leftover bags sat in a drawer for years, used occasionally as sandwich bags until the roll ran out. Number 13. The electric wok. Now let us talk about cooking surfaces because the 1980s had very strong opinions about stir-fry. The electric wok sat on the counter and promised authentic stir-fry at home. But a real wok in a Chinese restaurant sits over a burner producing flames hot enough to sear meat in seconds. The electric wok topped out at a temperature roughly equivalent to a warm car hood on a summer afternoon. Nothing seared. Nothing got that smoky, charred flavor that makes stir-fry worth eating. The vegetables sweated instead of crisping. The meat steamed instead of browning. Everything ended up in a pool of liquid at the bottom, which produced something closer to soup than stir-fry. The non-stick coating meant you could not season the wok the way a real one needed to be seasoned. And the shape was usually too shallow to toss anything without sending it over the side. Most electric woks became serving bowls for popcorn within a year. Number 12. The electric fondue set. Fondue had a brief and intense comeback in the late 1970s and early 1980s, and the electric fondue set was supposed to make it easier than the old candle and sterno version. The pot heated faster, held temperature better, and eliminated the open flame. None of that eliminated the reality that fondue is fundamentally impractical for a normal weeknight dinner. The cheese seized up if the temperature dropped. The chocolate burned if it climbed too high. The oil for meat fondue splattered across the table. Guests jabbed at each other with long forks trying to fish bread cubes out of the same pot. The cord stretched across the table between plates and wine glasses like a clothesline, and the cleanup involved scraping hardened cheese off the inside of a pot that was nearly impossible to submerge in water because of the electrical element bolted to the bottom. Fondue went back out of fashion by the mid-1980s, and the electric sets went with it. Number 11. The corn butterer. This was a small motorized roller coated in butter that you were supposed to roll across a hot ear of corn. The theory was that it would apply butter evenly without the mess of rubbing a stick of butter across the cob by hand. Instead, the butter melted off the roller before it reached the corn, dripped onto the plate, the table, and your lap. And the roller itself collected corn silk and bits of kernel until it looked like something pulled from a drain. The motorized versions vibrated the corn right off the plate. Manual versions required 2 hands, which left no hands available to actually hold the corn. A knife and a stick of butter worked better, cost nothing, and did not require batteries or an outlet. Number 10. The Countertop rotisserie. The idea of a golden, slowly rotating chicken turning on a spit in your own kitchen was powerfully appealing. The Countertop rotisserie promised exactly that. The machine was the size of a small television and sat directly beneath the upper cabinets, where it vented grease vapor onto the woodwork. Loading a whole chicken onto the spit required genuine skill. The bird had to be balanced precisely, or it spun lopsided and cooked unevenly, producing one side that was charred and one side that was still pink. The drip tray caught about half the grease. The other half ended up on the heating element, where it smoked and set off the kitchen smoke detector. The glass door fogged over almost immediately, which eliminated the entire visual appeal of watching the chicken rotate. And the chicken took just as long to cook as it did in a regular oven, which raised the obvious question of why you needed a separate machine to do what the oven already did. Number 9. The electric coffee percolator. For decades, the percolator was the American coffee maker. Every kitchen had one. Every morning started with the sound of water bubbling up through the stem and raining back down over the grounds. It was a sound so embedded in American life that television shows used it as shorthand for the start of the day. The percolator worked by cycling boiling water repeatedly through the same coffee grounds, which meant the longer it ran, the stronger and more bitter the coffee became. There was no way to control the brewing time precisely. There was no way to stop the water from recirculating through grounds that had already been extracted. The coffee at the top of the pot was weak, the coffee at the bottom was a dark, acrid concentrate, and every cup you poured was a gamble on which layer you were drawing from. The machine had one real advantage: it kept the coffee hot indefinitely. But it did so by continuously heating the pot, which meant the coffee got progressively worse as the morning went on. By mid-morning, what was left had the flavor and consistency of something you would use to strip paint. Then, the automatic drip coffee maker arrived. Mr. Coffee and its competitors did one thing the percolator could not. They passed water through the grounds exactly once. The coffee was cleaner, smoother, and consistent from the first cup to the last. By the middle of the 1980s, the drip machine had taken over almost every kitchen in the country, and the percolator was finished. Not broken, not recalled, not banned. Simply replaced by something that did the same job better. Millions of percolators went into closets and basements, and most of them are still there today, perfectly functional and completely forgotten. Number 8. The electric carving knife. The electric carving knife was a gift-wrapping staple of the 1980s. It came in a long plastic case that looked vaguely like something a surgeon would carry, and it contained a motorized handle with 2 serrated blades that vibrated back and forth at high speed. On Thanksgiving, you were supposed to use it to slice the turkey with the precision of a professional chef. The blades vibrated so violently that the turkey slid off the cutting board and across the counter. They caught on joints and tendons and jammed. The motor whined like a dentist's drill, and the slices it produced were ragged, shredded, and uneven because the vibrating motion tore the meat instead of cutting it cleanly. A sharp carving knife did the job better, quieter, and without the risk of sending the turkey across the kitchen. Most electric carving knives came out once a year at Thanksgiving and spent the other 364 days in the back of a drawer. Number 7. The electric juicer. The electric juicer was enormous. It weighed as much as a cinder block, took up half the counter, and required a full bag of oranges to produce a single glass of juice. The motor screamed at a volume that made conversation impossible. The pulp sprayed in every direction. The juice reservoir overflowed if you were not standing directly over it, watching the level like a lifeguard. The screen that separated the pulp from the juice clogged after 3 or 4 oranges and had to be cleaned before you could continue. The entire machine had to be disassembled and washed after every use, and the tiny crevices in the parts trapped dried pulp that turned into a science experiment within hours. A carton of orange juice from the store required no cleanup at all and tasted about the same. Number 6. The microwave browning dish. The biggest complaint about microwave ovens in the 1980s was that food came out pale and soggy. The microwave browning dish was supposed to fix that. It was a ceramic plate with a special coating that absorbed microwave energy and got extremely hot, essentially turning part of the microwave into a tiny griddle. You preheated the dish for several minutes, placed the food on the scorching surface, and in theory got a seared, browned exterior. In practice, the dish was so hot that the food welded itself to the surface on contact. Steak stuck, chicken stuck, everything stuck. The coating wore off within weeks of regular use, and without the coating, the dish was just a regular plate that got dangerously hot for no reason. The browning it produced was uneven at best, and the sizzling sound it made gave a false sense of progress that the final product never delivered. Number 5. The electric ice cream maker. Homemade ice cream sounded wonderful. The electric ice cream maker was a bucket with a motorized paddle that slowly churned cream, sugar, and flavoring into frozen dessert. The process took between 20 and 40 minutes, during which the motor hummed steadily and the anticipation built. The ice cream never quite froze. It reached a soft serve consistency and then stayed there, refusing to firm up no matter how long the machine ran. Getting it to a scoopable texture required transferring it to the freezer for several more hours, at which point it froze into a solid block that bent the scoop. The machine also required either a pre-frozen canister that took up half the freezer overnight or rock salt and ice packed around the bucket, which turned the kitchen counter into a wet, salty mess. Buying a pint from the store took about 30 seconds and tasted better. Number 4. The electric bread maker. The early electric bread makers of the 1980s were heavy, loud, and unreliable. The concept was that you poured in flour, water, yeast, and salt, pressed a button, and the machine mixed, kneaded, raised, and baked a loaf of bread while you went about your day. The bread came out in a shape that no bread had ever been before, a squat, rectangular block with a hole in the bottom where the mixing paddle lived. The crust was thick and pale, the crumb was dense, and the paddle was permanently embedded in the bottom of the loaf, requiring surgery with a butter knife to remove it. The yeast was sensitive to temperature and humidity, so the bread rose inconsistently. Some loaves came out as solid bricks. Others overflowed the pan and baked onto the heating element, filling the house with the smell of burning dough. The machines would not truly improve until the following decade, and even then the loaves never looked like anything from a bakery. Number 3. The Countertop Convection Oven. The Countertop Convection Oven was a glass bubble with a fan on top that circulated hot air around the food. The commercials showed golden roasts and crispy vegetables spinning under the dome like a museum exhibit. The glass dome fogged up within minutes. The fan was loud enough to compete with the exhaust hood, and the heating element was so close to the food that the top burned before the middle cooked through. The base was too small for anything larger than a modest chicken. The glass dome was impossible to store because it did not stack, fit in a cabinet, or stand upright without rolling off the shelf. and the machine produced so much heat that it turned the kitchen into a sauna in the summer, which negated the entire advantage of not using the full-size oven. The convection oven worked, technically, but it worked no better than the oven already built into the wall, and it took up more counter space while doing less. Number 2. The electric can opener. The electric can opener was mounted under the kitchen cabinet and looked like a piece of industrial equipment bolted to your wall. You held the can up to a magnetized wheel, pressed a lever, and the machine grabbed the can and rotated it against a cutting blade until the lid separated. The process took about 10 seconds and produced a sound like a tiny circular saw. The cutting wheel dulled over time and started leaving jagged metal edges on the lid that could slice a finger open. The magnet sometimes released the can mid-rotation, dropping it back into the open drawer below and spraying its contents across the silverware. The gears collected a dark, sticky residue made of metal shavings and food residue that was nearly impossible to clean. And when the motor finally burned out, which it always did, the opener hung from the cabinet as a useless monument to a problem that a $2 manual opener had already solved perfectly. Number 1. The Countertop dishwasher. The smallest and most desperate kitchen appliance of the 1980s was the Countertop dishwasher. Designed for apartments and small kitchens that did not have room for a full-size unit, it sat on the counter next to the sink and connected to the faucet with a rubber hose. It held about 6 plates, 4 glasses, and a handful of utensils, which was roughly 1 meal's worth of dishes for one person living alone. The machine ran for about an hour, used roughly the same amount of water as washing those dishes by hand, and produced a jet engine level of noise that made the kitchen unusable while it operated. The hose popped off the faucet with enough regularity that most owners kept a towel on the floor as standard procedure. And when the cycle finished, the dishes came out warm, damp, and spotted, requiring a hand dry with a towel anyway. The Countertop dishwasher solved the problem of not wanting to wash dishes by hand and replaced it with a dozen new problems that were all worse. The garage sale sticker is probably still on most of them. A quarter, maybe 50 cents, and nobody bought them then either. If you had any of these in your kitchen, tell us which one in the comments. Like this video, share it with someone who remembers, and subscribe to keep these memories alive.